Hello and welcome to our Direct Talk. Today we're joined by Martin Plaut, a renowned political analyst for the Horn of Africa. We will be discussing the withdrawal of Eritrean troops. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Can you provide an update on the current presence and movements of Eritrean forces in various foreign territories?
Well, I wish we could. Unfortunately, the situation is confused and confusing. It looks as if the Eritreans are still deep inside Ethiopia, in western Tigray, and also along the northern border. Now, of course, there are some areas in which they are legitimately along the northern border because parts of Ethiopia, as you will remember, were given to the Ethiopians and some parts given to the Eritreans by the Boundary Commission that came after the last war, the 98-2000 Boundary Commission border war, which led to the Boundary Commission. And the Boundary Commission adjudicated where the border is. So some areas are legitimately part of Eritrea, including, for example, the town of Badme and parts of Irob. I know that many people in Irob are very unhappy about that. But that was what was decided in accordance with the agreement signed by Meles and Isaias. And so it's very difficult to argue with that, but they are far beyond that. And the problem is that the African Union mediation effort, the people who are monitoring what's going on, haven't really provided detailed indications of where things are, how they're operating, what's going on. That is just not available.
In your opinion, what might be the reasons why Eritrean troops have not withdrawn from Tigray following the peace agreement? Are there any geopolitical or strategic factors that could explain this delay?
Well, of course there are. I can't remember President Isaias ever withdrawing from anywhere willingly. He sees himself as a huge global player in the region, that he can extend his power almost anywhere. The other thing that we are hearing is that he is training Amhara Fano militia inside Eritrea. Now, is this done with the agreement of Prime Minister Abiy? I doubt it, but possibly, but we can't know. Prime Minister Abiy seems to be so insistent on building his new palace. Is it $10 billion it's going to cost? Something absolutely unbelievable. That his concentration on these issues seems a bit removed, shall we say. But yes, there certainly are forces, and this has been the strategy that President Isaias has pursued now for decades. And that is that he will use other people's discontented groups, he will arm them, he will train them, and then he will use them as he wishes to in order to extend his influence across the region. And that's essentially, what he's done in the past. Don't forget that he backed Ethiopian groups who were trying to overthrow a previous government, and including sending somebody to try to put a bomb in an African Union meeting in Addis Ababa, and it was only foiled at the last moment. So, he's played these games for years and years and years. Sometimes he actually invades neighboring countries. Sometimes he just uses forces from those countries that he supports to undermine their sovereignty. And that is really what he does. And it's all a simple technique in order to extend his influence across the region. And that's basically what he does. And that's how he operates. And he's done it for years and years and years. He's never going to move away from it.
What are the potential implications, both humanitarian and political, of the prolonged presence of Eritrean troops in Tigray?
Well, of course, the humanitarian problems can be seen if you look at the various maps which are put out by the international agencies, which talk about where they can and where they can't go to deliver assistance, food, and other humanitarian relief effort across Tigray, and there are large areas that they can't get to. and the majority of them are because of the Eritrean troops being there. Although, let's be honest, there are some places where border crossings are blocked by the Amhara. Can't be sure how this is working. And I saw that Getachew Reda went to the Amhara region and had talks with them. Let's hope that that can resolve some of the issues. I mean, really, this is a big problem. And I don't know whether you've seen it, but there was quite recently quite a worrying video which showed this very senior Ethiopian and Eritrean commanders saying that they've now, they have built their unity out of blood and bones of their people, and it'll never be undermined. Well, it wasn't just Ethiopians that died, and we must never forget the huge sacrifice of the Tigrayans, and and other people, and that has to be, in a sense, that is the big problem. What will be the future of Tigray within the region and within Ethiopia? And that's something that Tigrayans must consider. And of course, it's something that Tigrayans must consider in relation with other peoples of Ethiopia. But that's not for me to, make a recommendation about, except that I hope that everybody can find a way that is a peaceful way forward that allows people to express their own identities. I think that's really the only way forward in the whole situation.
From your perspective, why do you think the international actors and peace mediators have not made significant enforcement efforts to ensure the withdrawal of Eritrean troops from Tigray? Are there any limitations or constraints that hinder their involvement in this matter?
Well, the international actors are not really participants in this. I mean, if you look at the agreement that was signed in Pretoria and the agreement that was signed in Nairobi, one of the things that is missing from it is the role of international actors as peacekeepers or peace enforcers. I mean, let's compare it, say, with the end of the border war, the 98 to 2000 border war. There were UN peacekeepers and peace monitors who were all along the border. They had a very tough time, trying to, make sure that the Eritreans allowed them to monitor what was going on. They made their life pretty difficult. Eventually, they gave up and went home. But I mean, there is no such similar force. So who on earth would be then enforcing it? There's no enforcement mechanism. There is I suppose you could say that the African Union people who are now involved in monitoring what's going on, they could write a scathing report saying, well, whatever it is, 6 months, 9 months, a year after the agreement, the Eritreans are still there. They could say that, they could make the report, and then who's going to do what about it? I don't know. I mean, what is so sad is that let me be frank with you. The international community is really determined to get back into a solid relationship with Ethiopia. They don't mind about Eritrea so much because they think of them as pretty irrelevant. But Ethiopia, they want to have a good relationship with Ethiopia and have always wanted to do that for the simple reason that Ethiopia is the key to the whole of the Horn of Africa. And so, for example, the Human Rights Commission, which was established to look at the terrible atrocities that were committed in Tigray and in other parts of Ethiopia, in Amhara and the Afar region, I think it's on its last legs. And yes, it will be discussed in a few days' time at the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva. Will they get anywhere? I must be honest, I don't think so. I think there just isn't the international support for it, and you would have to have huge pressure to do it. The only tool the international community has is money, and by holding up the assistance that Ethiopia could get through the IMF or the World Bank, that would be the way of ensuring that it happens. But I think this is a process. There is no political will in Brussels or in Washington, as far as I can tell. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can't see the political will to force that through, which means that it will kind of just peter out. And particularly the women of Tigray, who were so brutally raped and abused in ways that are indescribable, will never get justice. And I think that's a terrible thing to happen. It's a terrible legacy of the war, and it says to perpetrators, "You're fine. Don't worry. I know it's against the law. You'll never be held to account." And that is an awful, awful message for anybody to put forward.
Are you saying that the peace agreement was poorly designed?
The peace agreement, let's be honest about it, the peace agreement was the best the Tigrayan leadership could get. At the end of the day, this war, your leaders, as far as I can tell, and I'm your leaders, and you know much better than I do. Were faced with a terrible, terrible decision to make. And they had to either sign up to what was frankly a surrender, or they went on fighting. They went back to the hills, they went back to the mountains, and they had, as far as I can see, little in the way of ammunition left. Their people were starving. They would have got no aid. They hadn't managed to establish the supply routes either through Djibouti or Sudan. And the death toll would have been in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. People would have starved to death. And the leadership decided that, better sign up. This is the best deal we're going to get. But it was not a treaty. It was really a surrender. And I think one should just face up to that fact. It's not nice to think about it that way, especially given the extraordinary bravery of your young men and women who, what was it, 150 kilometers from Addis before they turned around and came back? Amazing what they did. But in the end, this was a war which has ended, I think, not in success, and therefore I think it's wrong to call it a peace treaty. In reality, it was a deal. It was the best deal that people could get. I'm not criticizing anybody for signing it. It's not my decision. I didn't have one person's deaths to consider. If they hadn't done it, I think the death rate would have been enormous and unsupportable. So that's where we are. It's the deal you could get.
What are the expected implications or potential consequences if the withdrawal of Eritrean troops is not completed in a timely manner? How do you think their presence affects the overall peace process and stability in the region?
Well, it's hard to be absolutely sure. Immediately, of course, it makes delivery of assistance, which I know at the moment is halted, but hopefully that will be lifted by the end of July. It makes delivery assistance very much more difficult, and it means that people cannot go home. How many people were forced out of Western Tigray and other parts of Tigray? Hundreds of thousands, and they are now refugees in their own country, and they really need to go home. So some deal needs to be done, which is why I think Getachew Reda was right to go and talk to the Amhara and say, look, let's find a way forward now. Of course, as usual, we haven't really got a reading on what was decided there, but I think that's the only thing that can be done. This hostility must be ended, and a way has to be found forward of achieving a new settlement. And it can be done. I always, and I'm sorry if I've made this point before, but, I always compare the situation with the people of France and Germany, who, fought two terrible world wars, which cost the lives of millions of people. Today, they can't even remember where the border is, practically. Of course, everybody knows where it is, but it makes no difference anymore. People live in each other's countries perfectly happily and relaxed. No Frenchman turns around and says, "Oh, you're a German," and no German says, "You're a French, go away." It's really not said anymore. And I think that's what one must always hope that can be achieved between the people of Amhara and the people of Tigray, and of course the people of Tigray and the people of Eritrea, who also have no real issues between them. So, the problem always lies, in a sense, at a political level rather than at a human level.
Are you saying that territorial integrity is not an issue?
Territorial integrity, of course, matters, but matters to whom? I mean, the cows that wander across a border don't give a damn where they eat the grass, and I mean, people fought between Scotland and England for hundreds of years, and there was blood all over the thing about where the border is. Today, people can't even remember where it is. So yes, of course, it is important. I'm not arguing that it isn't. It's the basis on which the United Nations was established and the African Union. So of course it is important. But let's not fetishize territorial integrity. At the end of the day, relationships between people is what matters, and the rights of people to exercise their judgment, their will in a democratic way. That to me is important. I mean, if the people of Ethiopia and Eritrea democratically, freely, and willingly reunited the two countries, I would say, fine, it's up to you, your choice. I mean, I supported Eritrea when they fought for their independence, and I still think that was the right thing to do. It was a terrible cost they paid. But if they decide, the people decide, not the leaders, if the people decide in the end they want to be part of the same country, up to them. I don't mind. As long as people can find a way of living in a democratic, peaceful, and hopefully successful country, great.
What should be the role of international actors and the government in ensuring the enforcement of withdrawal of Eritrean troops, considering the message it relies to other perpetrators out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, the Eritreans must leave. I mean, there's no, that's the bottom line. They are not in their country, and the Eritrean troops, really should be held to account, particularly the leadership, and not even so much the perpetrators or the individual soldiers, but the commanders who allowed these appalling things to happen. They should be held to account. Will it happen? I have my doubts, but one can always be hopeful. And the United States, particularly, which seems to be the big player in this area, but also the Arab states on the other side of the Red Sea, who played such an enormous role in the last war. I mean, let's not forget the drones being flown in from the United Arab Emirates. Or Turkey also supplied huge numbers of drones, and were instrumental in the war. So those things can't be forgotten, and they should also play their role in trying to resolve this problem, not just making money out of arms sales, which is really what, I mean, certainly Turkey has made an absolute fortune out of the misery and the suffering of the people of Tigray. Well, that's just completely unacceptable. But is anybody going to act in this? I must tell you, I don't think so. The international community is so, and when I say that, I mean particularly the European Union and the Americans are so concerned about the war in Ukraine and the Chinese threat to Taiwan and to the South China Sea and to its neighbors, as well as all the other concerns about climate change and all the rest of it. They don't really have much, shall we say, bandwidth left to go on worrying about the Horn of Africa, which is only one region that they have to be concerned about. I mean, after all, you could equally argue they should be deeply concerned about the situation in Mali, the situation in the Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, all of which have terrible disputes. So, I'm afraid I don't see much more political effort being put into this particular region at the moment, because it is not on the boil. I mean, on the boil at the moment is Sudan, and the small amount of attention that the international community gives to Africa and to the Horn of Africa in particular is being used up in that dispute, I'm afraid, rather than in the situation in Ethiopia. And I mean, I'm not talking about what I like or don't like. I'm just saying, let's be realistic.
Mr. Plaut, thank you for sharing your expertise and insights on these complex matters.
It's a pleasure, and I wish you all well. And I there will be part of my heart which will always be with you. And you know, it's a terrible situation, but one in which it's not without hope.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this edition of our Direct Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in.